happened is when it said that, when they touched him, he said, my brain couldn't compute what was going on. He said, I passed out. I fainted. So he said, I hit the ground next to the fire, and his buddy decided, hey, I got to help him. He's going to drag him away from the fire. This thing, he said, his buddy told him this thing grabbed him by the wrist and he had a knee brace where he had knee surgery. He was rehabilitated from knee surgery. But he had a knee brace. It grabbed the knee brace and his wrist and drug him out into the middle of the pipeline and left him. And then he wakes up and his buddy's like, hey, I thought maybe you were dead, you know? He said, no, why? He said, how'd I get out here? He said, well, you passed out. And he said, that thing drug you out into the middle of the pipeline. Maybe we're not talking about, you know, an actual Sasquatch pickup. Maybe we are talking about maybe some, you know, like you said, some weird, some feral person or wild person, you know, that just happened to be covered in hair. But it wasn't, he said it wasn't real thick hair. You could see skin through all over it.
This is God's country. That's what we like to call it. Almost heaven in West Virginia. A lot of peaks and valleys. Not so much like the Rocky Mountains, but we do have a lot of rock outcrops, beautiful venues, been to Seneca Rocks. Nelson Rocks is another great place that people can go to climb. And just,
Greg Lambert.
As far as the entire forest, it's 921,000 acres, and the terrain is, I would say, diverse. You have redwood forest, hardwood forest. You'll get into the higher elevations. It has those spruce.
Yeah, look at the separation.
Get into areas like Dolly Saw is part of that. It's a high plateau. Places like the Canadian Valley area, Blackwater Falls, and the Canadian area that are spruce, some other smaller stuff, but you have peat bogs. You have the peat bogs or the blister swamps, or what you would call them. Some of us call them. And then other places you have rock outcroppings and these sheer cliffs, and so it's pretty diverse as far as.
Let's go in here, dub, baby.
Even though 921,000 acres sounds huge, it's really not when it comes to something as far as that. But
Les,
that area, it's just crazy amount of.
talk to me, Les.
The type of things you can run into.
Be ready for the mountains and twists and the turns and the brake problems on your cars when you come over here. I don't know how these people do brakes on their vehicles over here. It's lifestyle's a little different over here than it is in Virginia. People are out in the woods more here than they are in Virginia. In Virginia, we've gotten a little soft. It's like we'll go out in the mountains if you really want to go hunt or if you want to go trout fish or something. But the people over here in West Virginia, they live in the mountains. So they're a little more hard people than us softies over in Virginia. So it's a difference there. The people are different.
You definitely have, your white-tailed deer. You have your normal environments. You have squirrels, skunks, possums, caves, all that stuff, the average stuff. there is a pretty good population of black bear here in this area. You know, also in Dolly Lodge, the black bear population is pretty high. Coyotes, Blackwater Falls, or no, sorry, yeah, some in Blackwater Falls area and Dolly Lodge area, and I guess around here in the Spruce, there are timber rattlers, especially in the Dolly Lodge area. A lot of people see them up there. I've seen video. I have not seen one yet, but I do follow a Facebook page about that up there, and people post about seeing them. So, yeah, there are some dangers. You just gotta, be careful where you're at. But other than that, there's the occasional. You'll hear the stories about mountain lions and stuff, which that's all over the state of West Virginia. But I've never seen one. I've had people tell me, yeah, we've seen multiple ones, but I've been out here and I've never seen one. I've never even had that feeling like when people, talk about being maybe stalked by one, you get that hair on the back of your neck standing up. I've never had that experience as far as that's concerned.
It's a great place. If you love the outdoors, this is a place to be. You can come and visit. And there's big food.
There are many places that something could hide. When you get back in some of these areas, there's rock outcroppings. I hate to say they might, the whole cave theory, because I don't think they really live in caves, but I think they can get into caves and take shelter. But the food is abundant here, especially like the Dolly Sods area or the David or Thomas and Davis area, Canadian Loop area. You have deer, you have other animals, you have fish. All these streams are stocked with fish. Not only stocked, but they have native fish, trout fish in them. And like the Dolly Sods area and the Canadian Loop area, and like in the cranberry area, it is just abundant with different types of cranberries, huckleberries, blueberries. So you have that kind of food source for them to have. And again, it's so dense. I mean, we're literally, what do you say? Not even an eighth of a mile. Like maybe 1,000 feet from the forest right here, and you can't see more than 50 to 100 feet from where we're standing. When you come on some of these other trees, and then it gets it seems to get darker a lot earlier because the canopy's so thick. So yeah, there's definitely room for things to hide.
There's a lot of farmland here, so if they would like to steal chickens, steal turkeys, I know people dump those things from time to time if they have something that would die for some reason. And like I say, if people actually dump, which they're not supposed to, something dies and they just dump it somewhere, that's easy pickings, and I've seen deer along the road, that have just laid until they rotted to pieces, and maybe vultures would get them. But there's so many deer here, so much roadkill, that it would be easy for, any animal that would want to scavenge a roadkill to get something to eat here. So yeah, I see it all the time. It's sad, but fact of life. But then you've got, like now this time of year, stuff is starting to come up. Ramps are coming up. The mushrooms will be popping up soon with the rain. It's already been wet, so the mushrooms will start to pop pretty soon. There's a lot of stuff for them to eat here. There's a lot of deer, other small game that they could catch and eat, and the water. There's a lot of water here. A lot of water in Pelham County. There are flood control dams all up and down through this area. You don't realize it. If you fly over in a plane, you'd be really surprised at the amount of dams that are here. So lots of lakes, ponds, just plenty of resources for it. The black bear here are very plentiful. So, if you could sustain something like black bear, that's the big argument. You can have a squatch that could live just as easily as a black bear.
Wildlife population. They have to eat. Their number one, of course this is all speculation, we don't know anything for sure, but being an animal of some sort, they have to eat. And they're not going to go to a grocery store. So they have to have food first and foremost, food and water. And I don't think the deer population is any higher anywhere else than it is right here in West Virginia. There are deer everywhere here in West Virginia. So they hunt in family groups. It's been witnessed. People have seen them hunt in family groups, and they chase down deer, snap a leg, try to find the next one. So it's easy food for them, just because of the abundance.
You've been looking into Bigfoot stories across the state.
Mhm.
I know you focused on parts of this part of the state.
Yeah.
What have you noticed over the years in terms of what people talk about in Bigfoot stories in these areas?
I noticed that there's not really like a huge similarity sometimes with them. I mean, a lot of times you hear from all this size. I've heard many things about it. Different colors, different sizes. Just some are odd. Some you hear. You hear about the hulking beast. 7, 8 feet tall, and then one I took a report several years ago. Well, not several. It's been like 2018. The woman, she said the best way I'd describe it, it looked like a black, hairy, like the Grinch from The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. It had a pot-bellied gut and stuff. Yeah, that's in Davis. They call it the Canyon Monster. That's where there was it was in the 60s, I believe it was. Some boys were out camping in the Blackwater Falls Canyon area. And they had the camp set up, and one was picking up wood or chopping wood or something like that. And he bent down and stood back up, and he felt something poking like in the ribs, and he turned around and was looking at this thing. And I almost say face to face every time, but it wasn't face to face because they said it was like 7 or 8 feet tall. Black in color, and had, they said, eyes that were like balls of hell, fire of hell. I don't know if they meant it was actually glowing, or maybe the fire was reflecting his eyes, but he did say it was like red color. And I thought that was interesting, a story. So I started looking into more about that area, and I found another story from, I think it was the 70s. Well, I didn't find it. The lady actually sent it to me. When I put the Canyon Monster thing on Facebook, she sent me an email. It was an anonymous email. She didn't put a name. And she said that her and her husband were driving along in the Davis and Thomas area somewhere. I forget exactly where. But one of these things crossed the road, and that's what they described it as a black, hairy creature, and its eyes looked like they were red. One of the reports that I've taken from the Dolly Solids area doesn't fit your typical Bigfoot type story. To me, it falls in more really hominid or feral person type story, and it's rather strange. So it just varies. I mean, it just depends who you talk to.
It seems like there are certain times a year when you're going to have more sightings. Obviously, hunting season, because there are more people in the woods during hunting season. But you have a lot of activity hunting season. But I think springtime is a really good time because, like I said, the food's starting to come up again, so there's more opportunity. What do they do in the wintertime? Maybe they gather food, they can hunt deer, just like humans do in the wintertime. The early settlers, they had to survive through the winter with what they could get off the land. So I think squatchers are the same way. They're smart enough to know that they need to gather some food up for the wintertime. Well, when I grew up, you didn't hear anything much about Bigfoot other than out in the Northwest. I was probably 8 years old when the Patterson-Gimlin film came out, which kind of piqued your interest if you were interested in that type of cryptid. But then you started hearing stories from local people, and you didn't put 2 and 2 together. But then when the legend of Bald Creek came out, I thought, oh, wait a minute. You know, that's, where is this Arkansas? You know, I'm thinking that's where near the northwest. So could there be something like that in this area? And then if you talk to older people here, they would come forth at some point and say, well, I've seen things I can't explain. I was actually talking to my doctor. He's from Pennsylvania. And he said, oh, you're looking for Bigfoot? Let me tell you a story about my dad when we were growing up in Pennsylvania. So, you know, if you bring up the subject of Bigfoot, people will tend to talk.
Is
Yeah.
there a story you heard from like an old timer that really kind of stuck out to you?
Yeah, it was not actually from him, but a man who knew him. They were in Sugar Grove, West Virginia. This guy drove like 35 miles an hour all the time. And they were coming back in from Virginia down the, he just called it Sugar Grove Road. And one came up over the bank and was chasing his car and keeping pace with his car. So he finally sped up and got away from it. His wife was terrified, but you know, he swore up and down, you know, that this thing chased him. And, you know, so they're like, wow, that's kind of crazy. But then I actually had an uncle who was a truck driver who saw one. And then a local gentleman here on the same mountain, I believe, saw one. And that was pretty intriguing. And I think West Virginia Magazine, I can't remember the year, actually did a story on Bigfoot. And so that was really cool, but I was paced, followed out of the woods at one point when I was 12 or 13 years old and couldn't explain it, didn't know, you know, what it might have been, but it really terrified me at the
Oh
time.
yeah.
And once the internet came out and you started reading stories on Bigfoot, then you put two and two together and said, okay, I think I have Bigfoot coming. But yeah, there are a lot of stories around this area of Pelham County. It seems like a hot spot in West Virginia for Bigfoot sightings. And there's a lot of stuff not published. Now, people don't like to be ridiculed, so they won't necessarily come out and just say, oh yeah, I believe in Bigfoot. Let me tell you what happened to me. But if you
What's up, man?
gain their confidence and talk
Thomas.
to them a little bit, eventually they'll come.
11 kills, not bad, not bad.
Yeah, I'll tell you what happened to me.
Do you have a favorite encounter that you've heard from this part of the state? Or something, or a favorite investigation or anything like that?
It would probably be the one from the Roaring Plains area. That I don't know exactly what this guy was experiencing. That might be, that would probably be it. I mean, as far as a full-on story, other than like, hey, I seen this creature. I mean, this was like a story laid out the way he described it. And I mean, he told me the story over a span of almost like an hour and a half to 2 hours. Talking about him and his buddy were camping. I actually listened to it again. I found the recorder. I thought I lost the story. I actually listened to it on the way down and refreshed my mind on it. And I've been telling the story a few times over the years. Well, I told a few things wrong on it. I took bits and pieces of it that I remembered and put them out of sequence. But he was talking about being in the Roaring Plains area for a short part of it. They started noticing that you hear pebbles or something hitting the tent while they were in the tent the first night. His buddy kept saying he felt like they were being followed when they were hiking. Then they get back to the tent, or back to the camp, and again, they were outside camp. Stuff was being thrown. And they thought, each one of them thought the other one was doing it. They were like, hey, quit messing with me, don't, And then they found out, no, this is coming from the woods. So they, again, decided to go to the Roaring Plains area. The one fellow had already been to the meadows. The other one didn't go because he had gotten sick. And he comes back and says, you got to go with me. And so they go, and they're in the meadows, and they're coming, or he goes to the meadows, and the other guy goes
Mr. D, Glock
As he's coming
19.
back, he notices this thing outside the tent. And
Oh shit.
it's looking in the tent. Well, his
My
buddy's
bad,
in the
my
tent.
bad, my
I
bad.
thought it, you know, like I said, I made a mistake on some of the stories. He told me about this buddy being in the creek. Well, that's when he got sick, when he was in the creek. But he'd already made it back to the camp. And he sees this thing outside the tent, and he walks up, and he notices it, and it stands up, and he said, this thing is massive. It's like 7 to 8 feet, 7.5 feet tall or something there. And it's all hairy, but he's thinking, you know, this is one of them hairy wild people that he's, you know, basically a feral person, he's thinking. It takes off. His buddy's in the tent, and he's like, when he got back there, this thing was in the tent and was backing out, and that's what he saw was his legs backing out of the tent. And so his buddy's like, I want to go home. I want to go to the truck. I want to get out of here. He said, no, man. He said, this thing didn't hurt nobody. He said, it's just, he said, it's somebody in a suit or something. And, or whatever, some weirdo. So they stayed. He said, well, if it comes back, you're dealing with it.
Got you, buddy. I got you.
He said, there's a full moon night. And he said to his buddies, like, hey, it's back outside. Everybody's outside. And he looks out, and there's things standing out there. And he gets out, and he's looking at it. He gets out of the tent, and he said, hey, we're trying to talk to it. And he said, he started walking toward it. And he's looking at it, and that's when he kind of realized that this thing isn't somebody in a costume. It's real. And he said it's like a big naked, hairy man. So he walks over, and he puts his arm, has his arm out, and this thing puts his arm out, and he grabs the arm. And that's when he said, oh my God, you are real. Just like, that. And he said that's when it tried to mimic him. He said, but it didn't say, when it said real, he said it didn't add the L. It just would go, you're real, like that. And, well, it takes off again. It leaves. So, well, no, it didn't take off at that time. What happened is, when it said that, and they touched him, he said, my brain couldn't compute what was going on. He said, I passed out. I fainted. So he said, I hit the ground next to the fire, and his buddy decided, hey, I got to help him. I'm going to drag him away from the fire. This thing, he said, his buddy told him this thing grabbed him by the wrist and he had a knee brace where he had knee surgery. He was rehabilitated from knee surgery. But he had a knee brace. It grabbed the knee brace and his wrist and dragged him out into the middle of the pipeline and left him. And then he wakes up, and his buddy's like, hey, I thought maybe you were dead, He said, no, why? He said, how did I get out here? He said, well, you passed out. And he said, that thing drove you out into the middle of the pipeline. So he got back to the camp and stuff, and they were like wanting to go. Everybody wanted to go. He said, no, he said, you never hurt nobody. He said, and he's still thinking it's just some weird part, weird, like, whatever, somebody. He's not thinking Bigfoot or anything. And the way he describes it, I'm not sure if that's what he has seen either. Because you hear about or described it is having the features, because he said he was a physical anthropology student at the time, and he knew about the Denisovians and some other stuff. He said it kind of had that brow ridge and the wide nose like a Denisovian. He said it would almost
Denisovian.
He said if he was in Australia, Australia, he said it would remind him more of an Aboriginal from Australia, but just not the dark complexion. So they eventually, things went on.
You want to play BR?
They go back. They go back sometime later again.
Let's go, BR.
And they encounter this thing again. And this is where I messed up in the story. I always thought that it was from the first encounter. The second encounter, they're around camp, and this thing actually brings in a deer. And it just right there in front of them decides to start taking the deer apart to eat this deer. Not trying to like cook it or anything like that. Like tearing pieces off this deer. Like he said, good luck. It was extremely eerie because he said you look over and you see this thing chewing on this deer, biting into this like deer leg or whatever. His face is covered in blood, and he said the fire is like reflecting off. He said it's the most ominous, freaky thing he's ever seen in his life. But he said over the years he's never experienced anything else again in that area. He eventually went.
Yeah, let's go get a dub.
Lost,
okay.
Interest in it. Come back here. He now lives in Pocahontas County. He's talked to other people that have heard or experienced stuff. He said most of the old folks in that area call it the Yahoo or Yahoo. He just called it, he said, I just call it the spirit of the woods. He said, because the area there just had this vibe to it. He said, it's like the spirit of the woods. So I just gave it the name Spirit of the Woods. He said, was it a big place? I don't know. He said, he said, I know it wasn't an actual person, like a normal person.
What do you think of that story when you first heard it, and what was your first reaction?
I kind of, I listened to it really intently because he was real matter of fact about it. It wasn't like he's sitting there and he rattled it off. He experienced something, in my opinion. I mean, some of it seems a little kind of out there, but again, maybe we're not talking about, an actual Sasquatch. Maybe we are talking about maybe some, like you said, some feral person or wild person, that just happened to be covered in hair. But it wasn't, he said it wasn't real thick hair. You could see skin through all over it. So it wasn't like you hear some of these others that these creatures are completely covered in fur or hair, like, you can't see through it. He said you could see through it. And it had like almost like he said, like an Italian, that dark complexion, bronze, brownish color, or something like that, skin. So, yeah, that was a crypt.
I've never heard that one before. That's
What
wild.
the fuck?
And that whole topic of feral people, I mean, that's obviously something I think a lot of people in the Bigfoot world kind of look at. And
yeah.
have you heard any other stories of feral people like that, or not really?
I mean, not from like the first-hand accounts, but if you read some of the older newspaper accounts, that's definitely what people probably were running into.
Bruh.
For a while, and it was probably feral people, especially the ones that they would see that are covered in hair, have hair, long hair on their head, and have tattered clothing on. That's definitely what those were. But as far as a first-person count, no, that's the only one I've ever taken.
Now, do you have a favorite, particularly interesting encounter that maybe you've heard over the years or told you or you've researched that kind of sticks out to you that's just like, this is my favorite or very interesting?
There's a gentleman who has a little shop downtown, and he was a truck driver. This was, back in, I want to say, early 80s. I can't remember for sure the timeline, but he was a truck driver, and he had stopped to check his load straps, and had gotten down out of the cab of the truck, and he had talked to some gentlemen south of here who had a hunting camp that had some activity, and told him, these things are here, they're real. And they said, if you ever smell anything that smells like death, they said, they're around. So he gets out of his truck, he's walking around his truck, he's checking stuff out, and he goes to get back in his truck and he smells this horrible smell, and turns and looks in his headlights, and there's one standing looking at him. And he said his knees kind of got weak and crawled back up in the cab of his truck, and the thing just turned and walked off. But yeah, I'm sure he took a lot of heat over that for a long time. But my dad was still alive at the time, and we talked to him about it. And we were, really excited for him, and the fact that, hey, somebody saw Bigfoot here. So you can't. It's hard to discount and tell somebody they didn't see what they saw. Now, just this past year, a friend of mine was going to pick up his boys from ball practice, and one ran along the road. He said it was at least 8 feet tall, very broad shoulders, fast, very fast. And he said it ran, and he saw it for a few seconds, and then it just disappeared. And I said, you mean it dropped down over the bank or went into the woods? He said, no, it disappeared. So, I'm not into what we call the woo. I don't think it ran into a portal or went underground. So I kind of chatted with Russ Jones about this a little bit. We think your mind is seeing something that's not supposed to be there. And you're thinking to yourself, I'm not seeing this. Your mind is telling you that can't be real. He said, but I know what I saw. He said, there's no doubt in my mind that's what it was. And he was not a believer until that point. And once that happened to him, he said, okay. I tried to get him to do a report, but he said he didn't want his name associated with it for the rest of his life, you know, as being, another Bigfoot guy. So, but he said, I know what I saw. Yeah. And he took me, I said, well, show me where it was. And there's actually have been sightings around that area clear back into the 60s. I've gotten reports from close to that area. So, yeah. But it's strange because it was at the end of a driveway. And there were several houses right there close by. And I thought, why would it cross the road there? It seems strange, but we don't know why they do what they do and why they go where they go. If we did, we'd have one in a cage. It'd have been over by now.
We're in Mobilegaming National Forest. We're just probably 10 or so miles, maybe 10 or 12 miles below Spruce Knob, a couple miles below the lake. I mean, people that know the area will know what I'm talking about. I mean, it used to be a little community here. It was called Osceola. I guess back in the day, it was an old logging town. It's no longer here. Like a lot of the old towns are, have gone to the wayside. But yeah, it's just a cool area that I discovered. Somebody told me about it. There being vocals from this area, and it was a cool area or a cool spot that I found. And if I had a research area, this is probably it. Because I mean I go all over the place, but this is where I keep coming back to when I can. And I found a few interesting things here. So, and I had a couple experiences that I don't know if they were Bigfoot related, but it was pretty neat. I casted it mainly because the hill was extremely wide. It wasn't like narrow, like it was a boot or somebody's foot. It was pretty much right here in these two trees. And then as I was looking around, I found another one up that way that kind of matched it. They weren't, like I said, I was telling you guys earlier, it wasn't like it was a trackway. There was just a couple of prints. The really cool thing that happened after that, as I'm walking, I'd stay along the creek mainly to use it as a guardrail, for hiking instead of having to worry about following GPS stuff. So I stay along the creek, and I started hearing what I thought was a chattering, mumbling type noise. So I just passed it off. Oh, it's just what they call the babble of the creek. It's just my ears playing tricks on me. But while these were setting up, I decided I'll go up a little ways, cut off to the right, and then go in so far and come back down to make like a grid type, whatever you want to call it, and look for substrate similar to that. That black wet stuff. Well, I found a couple spots up there, and I looked at the first one, didn't find anything. Got to the second one, and I'm looking around, and I don't see anything, or I don't see any tracks. But I started hearing like if I'm looking at here, there's a rock face with some a bank with some rocks sticking out behind me, and some laurel bushes and stuff. I start hearing something move in that brush. And I'm thinking, maybe it's a deer, maybe it's a bear. So I hurried, if there's a bear, I hurried up, turned around and looked. And when I did, something went running the opposite direction. I don't know what it was. I didn't see anything, but it went just barreled through the woods. But I do know there's cows near here. A cow looks like it just took off running like that, not generally. And so I come back down here, the prints were set. I pulled them, I'm like, man, it's a really cool area. I want to come back here. So the following week I come back, and I'll have to send you the pictures of this. I come in, and right here, there was like these smaller trees, but there's no limbs on them, just like long sticks, and they placed in an X between those two trees. And I was like, why? Well, I don't understand why they would be there, because nobody knew I was here the week before. Nobody knew I was coming back. So why would somebody do that to play a trick on me? And I still don't know why they were there or who done it. But people would speculate, oh, that's these things tell you not to come back. You're not welcome here. I mean, I know that's purely speculation, so I see it that way. But I've been back here once. I've come back several times. I was here again in October with some friends. We went up, actually found that print over here, went up around, there's a rock outcroppings or whatever you want to call them up here, just big crevices in there, and up there looking at those. And that's where we found what looks like what people will call structure, deep impact structure. But the only thing about it that caught my interest, there was in part of it, there was like I guess, out west they call it the floating beam, or whatever in their structure. It kind of had that look. So we checked it out and didn't find anything interesting on it. No herring again. We just took some pictures and documented we found it. And thought it was pretty cool to find. But this ain't one of my favorite areas from this school.
I can see why.
We're in the national forest. We're pretty deep in the national forest as far as like coming away from civilizations, I guess you say. But we're not that far off the road. When you get ready, when you get, not back in here, it's there. It's just, there's nothing back here to, you can hide back there about anything if you wanted to. I've heard a couple stories mentioned about the Seneca Creek backcountry trail. Again, I'll say this. I don't know if they've seen anything, but it was the quintessential, they were being followed or paced out from the trail. Could have been some weirdo hikers, because it is a pretty busy trail, absolutely. But, these people that posted them, one was actually a lady a few years ago, was pretty terrified. She was hiking out and she couldn't see anything, but she could hear this thing, a thing, or whatever you want to call it. Just paralleling her out to the trailhead.
Do you think it's kind of the best evidence you've seen out of these kind of areas, these hills here?
I found a couple prints that it could be prints. The best one I found was in the Canadian Loop area. As far as the evidence I found, definitely, and talking to people and getting their accounts and hearing the stories and seeing some of their reactions of the reactions from when they're telling the story, whether you can believe them or not, you can definitely tell them, especially when, they're having what I call a trigger reaction, when they tell that story. To me, that's some of the best evidence. Some people don't believe so, but to me that is. When you can actually talk to some people, or talk to people, and they can, and you've gained their trust and confidence to talk to you, and they can share that. To me, that's what it's about for me. I'm not out here to prove that these things do exist. I don't go out here and go, oh yeah, here's this. They do exist here. I don't know, because I've not had a sighting of my own. I just know I'll document what I find, and I'll try my best to explain what I find. My best most times to debunk what I find, and I always put the disclaimer when I show people. This is me documenting something. This could be what it is, and this could be what it's not, or there might be something else. But I always point like the prints that I found nearby, partial prints. The reason I casted those, kept those, is because I found that they were interesting because the heel was really extremely wide. It wasn't like a normal foot, a human foot, or a boot. It had a wide, rounded heel, and I just thought they were interesting. They're not the most definitive prints, but they were something I wanted to document and keep. a short video of like this. Well, what it is? It's a video that a YouTube channel posted. I forget the name on the YouTube channel. It's the only video on the channel. It's I think I can't remember how long it is. It's not super long. It's just seconds long, and it's in an area kind of like this, and it's foggy. It's misty, and you see this thing walking. The guy was actually out geocaching and supposedly caught this on camera. It walks in behind trees and into an open, like someone semi.
Fuck.
And he believes it was a Sasquatch. And you don't see great definition because of the camera, I guess, plus the moisture, but you see the silhouette, and the arms look extremely long. You know, I think that's pretty cool. You know, some people say it's a hoax. Some other people say no. They've had other experience in the area. Another person I talked to said they actually went to the area and know because it was on near one of the ski trails, and they kind of went out and kind of judged how tall this thing could have been, and it was supposedly substantially tall. But as far as is it a legitimate Bigfoot, I don't know. It's one of them. Yeah. Yes, maybe not. So.
West Virginia is where I had my first Bigfoot expedition, and my first experience as a group, other than my screamed. I got screamed at the very first thing. But yeah, I've witnessed a lot of firsts here in West Virginia. Blackwater Falls, my favorite place. I will always hold that place near to my heart because that's where I first went on my first Bigfoot expedition. And so I witnessed eye glow there for the first time. You know, these things have the ability to internally illuminate their eyes. And I witnessed that there for the first time. And I've seen it since then at least a dozen times. So they have the ability to internally illuminate their eyes to glow, but they can also, like, sounds crazy, I know, and until you witness it for yourself, most people don't even believe it's impossible, but they can actually cast a light that shines kind of like a flashlight out from their eyes, and it is typically white. I've seen that 3 times, and I've seen that in Virginia, Kentucky, and Maryland. I haven't seen that in West Virginia, but the eye glow I have seen in West Virginia several times. My first one that I saw was a bluish green tint over at Blackwater Falls, so it was interesting.
I was with
Damn
two
it.
other gentlemen.
I'm a fucking
and,
moron.
There was another group on a trail here, and we're converging into an intersection. We got there first, sat down on a log, and one of the gentlemen pulled out a harmonica and started to play. We had cut our lights off, and I was sitting there with my thermal and just looking around and just being quiet and listening. And
What the
played
fuck?
harmonica, and we called back and forth to a barred owl several times and played with him. And then he stopped playing, and we just sat there in the quiet, and a rock came in from behind us and hit a tree in front of us and cracked like a shot, and that was a real eye-opener. So I thermed up on the hill, nothing. Couldn't see anything, no hot spot anywhere. So I got on the radio and called the other group, and then we actually had some beavers down below us slapping their tails on the water, which we thought at first might have been something throwing rocks in the water, but once we saw the beavers, we said, okay, we think maybe that was the beaver spice, but beavers weren't up on that hill throwing rocks at us. So I don't know if they liked the harmonica playing and they didn't want any more of it, or they wanted to hear another tune. But yeah, the rock throwing incident was, you know, what throws rocks in the woods? You know, there's nobody else around. It's the middle of the night. We're sitting there in the dark. So the only way something would know that we were there. If it could see us in the dark, smell us in the dark, but could hear that harmonica playing.
God damn it,
It
dude.
didn't hit us with a rock, but threw a rock in our direction hard enough that it got our attention. There was actually a story I wanted to tell you that my sister encountered. It's a place they call Seldom Seen. So, you know, that tells you a little bit about that area. She and a friend, this was when they were in high school, went to this farm, and they were riding the trail 90, and they come up into this field, and they see something big and black take off at the end of the field and go into the woods. So they immediately, it scares them, so they turn around and go back. And then the girl that's riding the trail 90 turns and says, let's go back and see what that was. And she said, no, 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 don't you go back up there. I don't want to go back up there. So they let it go at that. That night, they had a loft in the barn where they had a room set up. So the girls were going to spend the night up there in the loft. Well, that night, rocks, not big rocks, but, you know, about yay size and pebbles, started hitting the roof on the barn.
Oh, Jesus.
And, you know, it scared them, but they thought her brothers are out there throwing rocks on the roof, trying to scare them. They're like, ha, 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 real funny, you know. So they go to sleep. The next morning they get up, they go in the house for breakfast, and they're saying something to the boys about, hey, yeah, nice try trying to scare us, throwing rocks on the roof of the barn last night. And they're like, what are you talking about? We have no idea what you're talking about. So they said, we were not out of the house last night. Their parents said, was not them. So there was another rock throwing incident, and that was, gosh, back in the early 70s, mid 70s, yeah, probably about the mid 70s. So I know a gentleman I personally know, back in the 60s, they were spotlighting deer, and I pulled this report, which had a very strange phone number, and this phone number is overseas. This gentleman was retired military. Back in the 60s, you could spotlight deer.
Oh, you got a different one now.
You couldn't have a gun in the car. And they actually spotlighted 2 squatches in a place called Deer Run. And they thought it was a bear at first until it stood up, walked across the field, and stepped across a rail fence on 2 legs. And they said,
Dude, come
"That was no
on."
bear." So I actually discovered one of the gentlemen that was with him, I know, and he said, well, let me tell you a story. So I said, okay, here we go. He said, what did he say it was? And I said, he said it was a Bigfoot. He said, okay. He was deer hunting, avid hunter. It was a very foggy morning, and he said something was chasing him through the woods, just out of sight. He said there was something walking, and it sounded like on 2 legs. So he said, I'll walk towards it, and it would walk away. And he said, then I'd go back over to where I was going, continue on, and he said, same thing. It was pacing me through the woods. He said, so I stopped, started towards it, and it walked away. He said, I never could see it. It was too foggy. He said, it freaked me out.
Fuck.
He said, I got scared. He said, I've got a high-powered hunting rifle with me. He said, but I went back to the house. I did not hunt anymore that day. So, yeah, what does that? Not a lot that makes sense. So you just keep adding those stories up. Rock throw, following you through the woods. You know, you're finding scat, you're finding tracks. They're here. There should be enough evidence that, you know, hopefully Darby proves it, and we can all say, I told you so.
Yo, let's play Warzone.
You mentioned that, you know, there's more people kind of living, obviously, West Virginia has a smaller population, there's more people living in Why do you think that West
got to be there to see it. So, you know, people live in the woods, so they'll have their houses built on the side of the mountain. So they live their daily lives in the woods, in the mountains where these things live. And these things are curious, so they will come near civilization. You don't have to go far to witness Bigfoot activity. In fact, if I'm looking on a map to try to pick out a place that I want to go do some research, some of the things that I look for is actually close to civilization, because these things are curious. They don't have a lot of stuff to do. Their lives consist of just surviving, finding food, finding shelter, I guess, or some place to stay out of a storm, weather through a storm or something. But so they're curious. They're curious of us hairless people, I guess you would say.
Third person, baby.
But,
Third person.
But they come close to civilization. I look for power lines, places that have been cut out for power lines. I look for small bodies of water. These things tend to gather near both of those. They use the power lines for easy travel. You know, that's and that usually consists of civilization. So we don't have to go that far for these things.
Welcome to Battle Royale. The match of the start.
I think the attitude changed. People are more willing to accept it. Bigfoot's big business now. A lot of money in Bigfoot.
Battle Royale.
I'm not in for the money. I'm just in it for the curiosity. You know, making friends through Bigfoot. I made some great friends through Bigfoot, lifelong friends. But yeah, people have been a little more acceptable of Bigfoot.
This map's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, the people here, the people in West Virginia are fantastic. It reminds me of my family.
Lock in, baby.
I'm from Alabama originally, so people in West Virginia are a lot like the people in Alabama, which are great people, good home family people. They'll do anything for you. If you need help, they're there to help you. It's just, I love the state. It's it catches a lot of flack from others who don't understand the state, but West Virginia's great. You got to be here to experience it.
I think this is just a great place that's kind of underrated as far as Bigfoot
Get the
goes.
dog tag. Help them return to
I
the
know we actually, Lobo told us one time that he loved it here. He would like to do more squatching on the East Coast, and West Virginia was one of the places he wanted to come to, because there's plenty of mountainous area and there's not a lot of population here. You know, I don't know, as far as our town here, might be 800 people, but county-wise, I'm not sure what the last census said, but it's
Come on.
very easy for something to hide here, and if it doesn't want to be seen,
Get the dog tag. Help
here
them
my
return to the battle.
Yeah, it's a beautiful area. There's a lot of things to see here. Don't be afraid, you know, of the stories, you know. And also, if you do hear the stories, don't be a fool. Come out here, like, try to do whatever, you know, be a gung-ho. Be respectful. You know, this is a national forest. You know, people do visit here a lot. Just be respectful. Is there something here? I don't know. You know, is there? I don't know. I mean, there have been stories and stuff, and is there legitimacy to them stories? Some of them I believe so, you know, and then there are a few that, you know, you can tell me wrong. But just come out and explore. If you don't get out here and explore, you'll never know what you'll find. You know, you can't just sit there. I mean, it's fine to do your research at your house. You know, do your historical research, do your research of the terrain. You know, look for that. The three things: food, water, shelter. Everything needs it. Look for that area. If you think you found an area that some of these things might exist, just be careful. Go out there and remember, there are things here that can hurt you. You know, it may not be animals. There's, like in this area here, you'll just be walking along and you'll find a hole between roots, or you'll find a rock crevice that's covered, and then you'll fall. You know, you hurt a leg, and you're a good ways from in the hospital. There's no phone service here. You know, it's not that easy to get out of here, especially, like me, my wife gets on me all the time, because I'm out here by myself for the most part. So that's why, if you do it that way, I do with my wife, she knows where I'm going. Like when I come here, she already has the coordinates of where I'm going. I turn on my location on my phone. We actually downloaded another tracking thing on our phone. It's called Life 360. She can flash for free. She can follow me around. At least she'll know where I'm at. And not only do I tell her, but I tell my son, and I tell a couple of my friends, Tammy and Danny usually know where I'm at, and they've been here with me. So.
Awesome. And is there, if you want to report a sighting to you or send you a story, you want to just kind of plug yourself and your channel and that kind of thing like that?
Yeah, you can. I do a YouTube channel, like I said. I can tell people it's not a great channel. I just get on and talk to me. I don't do no fluffy stuff. You see it on YouTube. It's WVKs, or WV Cryptids and Strange Encounters, which stands for WVKs. But I think you had to. Pretty sure you had to type that out. Just WV Cryptids and Strange Encounters, not West Virginia. I'm also on Facebook under that, or you can look me up, Les Odell, on Facebook. Email westvirginiacase304@yahoo.com is where I usually get. I used to have another one, but it got so much junk on it, so I had to start a new one. That's the new email. People send me their stories or whatever. When I'm going to go through, once I get that, I can go back to the email and eventually we'll change, exchange numbers and chat and talk. And if it's something that I can get to and do, then I'll go out and meet people and check out the area.
Sightings in and around Vermont have a popular network television show coming to our region.
Bigfoot sightings across New England have been reported for hundreds of years.
Red glowing eyes, about 7 feet tall, making a sound like a pig squealing or a woman screaming, and walking like a man but looking more like a gorilla.
That's the most common description researcher and Bigfoot author Paul Bartholomew says he hears from those who say they've seen the Sasquatch.
It's a global phenomenon, and it's here in our own backyard.
Just east of Whitehall, sightings have been reported all along Route 4 and all across the state of Vermont from Bennington to Colchester. Frank Cienski
Come on, man. What the fuck?
was near his home.
One section of my apple tree, the apples were completely devoured. One whole section, and I pointed it out to my wife, and she says, "Oh God," she says, "the deer must have been hungry." And I said, "No, a deer couldn't eat that many apples in one night."
So Cienski set up a trail camera, trying to catch the Sasquatch on tape. On one September night 2 years ago, he recorded this.
We found out from researchers and experts that this is a female Sasquatch with a young underneath it. It is protecting its young.
Your teammate has been killed. Get the dog tags and help them return to the battle.
We are in Rutland, Vermont today. We are filming a movie, 2 movies in the series for while we're here. I thought it would be good to get out into the woods with some local researchers. So I have asked 2 of my friends, Steve Calls and Mike Ian, to kind of show us the area, take us to some sighting locations. So that's what we're doing. Right now we're outside of Rutland. Following them, and we're going to head out to at least 2 different sighting locations somewhere outside of town. But Vermont is not a part of the country that I've had much experience in. Mostly the only time I've been here is when I'm on my way down there places. But I would say the closest I've come to being in Vermont is
Your teammate is standard go tag.
east of Whitehall
Wait for the revive.
on the trail looking for the journey. So I'm excited to get out into the woods and hear about some of the sightings that have taken place here. The one thing I can say as someone who has not spent time in this state is that I was shocked at how mountainous, rugged, and somewhat rural certain parts of the state are. On my drive to Rutland, I was really surprised at the amount of forest and mountains that we were driving through. Not like hills that are masquerading as mountains, but actual mountains. So, yeah, we're gonna learn more about Vermont today and see what we can find in terms of Bigfoot habitat.
Dog tag to the scan.
Airdrop's coming.
Airdrop incoming.
Spend enough time talking to Bigfoot researchers and you start to notice a pattern. Some of the most grounded, clear-headed voices in the field tend to come from backgrounds in law enforcement or investigation. Folks who don't just get pulled in by stories. They ask questions, look for patterns, and pay
Get the
attention
dog
to
tag to help them
details.
return to battle.
Steve Calls is one of those voices. Known to most as the Squatch Detective, Steve came into this world after a long career in private investigation and loss prevention. And when he turned that investigative lens toward Sasquatch, he brought with him a no-nonsense approach rooted in evidence and first-hand data. He's traveled the country, digging into Bigfoot reports with a skeptical eye and a genuine curiosity. Steve was featured in one of our earliest STM films, and over the years, we've become friends. He's someone I trust to cut through the noise and get to the heart of the story. Mike Ian's path was a little different, but just as rooted in boots-on-the-ground experience. Mike is still an active law enforcement officer in New York, and it was Steve who brought him into the world of Bigfoot research. Since then, he's worked with groups like NESRA, the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society, and Project Zoobook, a group of scientists and professionals from various fields, all trying to piece together the Sasquatch mystery. Like Steve, Mike's appeared in past Small Town Monsters films, and like Steve, he's become a friend. He's the kind of guy who brings both heart and logic to the table, balancing family life, field work, and a thoughtful approach to a topic most people write off as fantasy. What ties them together isn't just their law enforcement backgrounds or their long resumes. It's the way they treat people, the way they approach witnesses with empathy, the way they follow leads without losing their skepticism. In a field full of noise, Steve and Mike have always been the kind of voices I'm glad to have around. They remind you that this search isn't just about what's out there in the woods, but how we go about finding it.
Steve, how long have you been researching here?
27 years. 1998 I started, but I started really hitting Utah ground in 2000. But that was I was involved with research learning of that. It was in 98 when I read Monsters in the Northwoods that hey, I didn't realize they were in my backyard. And I mean, literally it wasn't my backyard, but a couple of hours was my backyard. So,
Like, how much time have you spent, like, researching this area?
On and off. A couple days here and there. Usually I come down to Steve and kind of bounce along. So usually on this side of the state, it's usually support. So extra cameras, gear. I'll come over and get on my hand. But I'm 4.5 hours over on the other side of the state. So coming over to hang with Steve, Frank, or I'm also a member of NASRA. So we've kind of worked this whole area and more towards the Lake George area. But you know, if we got a down day or something like that, I'll try to do some stuff like that over here. So,
Steve, can you tell us where we are? Because right now we're just off. First of all, what highway is this?
this is Route 4 in Vermont, and this will actually take us right into Whitehall from here. It goes eastward to Rutland and westward to U.S. Route 4, which obviously will, you know, they're great. And a while
find around Route 4 all the sightings here. You have about 2 miles down the road there, you have the Grabowski farm where they had seen a family of 4 Bigfoot walking around. We are, maybe 15 miles away, all of that. It's about as far.
I've only played this game with like 3 or 4 times. I play the other one. So yeah, that's why I'm no good at this Warzone. On isolated. I play zombies, I play multiplayer. I just got into the other map, Krai, whatever.
Which one is that? Bird Mountain is the one right there. Yeah, it looks like it has the old caldera in it.
What's the significance of that?
Well, Bird Mountain, the owners, on the other side there was an old ski resort. What happened is they were out one day and they had observed from a far distance a family of Sasquatch moving across the field. And I believe there was even a photograph of it. Yeah. None of my mind was back to it because this happened again in the 70s. You know, the same time Air Road was having all their stuff. But back in, I want to say 2017.
How you doing today?
On the back side of the mountain, along that.
Dude, is it really fucking raining out? What the fuck?
A gentleman was driving his ATV up Bird Mountain and had one sitting in front of him. It's all private property, so it's like right over in here where this mountain was, where Dr. Warren Cook's daughter had to site it. That's right over here. And there's Bird. It's just really wild. And then, of course, you go down a little bit that way, there's Castleton, which is the home of Dr. Warren Cook.
Yeah, if we can get over that way, I think that'd be cool.
Airdrop has been delivered.
There are names tied to this subject that most people have never heard. People who spent their lives chasing answers quietly, without faith. That's something I've noticed in this line of work. The most important voices are often the ones speaking the softest. Bill Brand was one of them. He founded the Northern Sasquatch Research Society and spent decades investigating sightings in the Adirondacks and northern New England. Bill was one of the few who tried to give structure to the search out here, organizing reports, tracking activity, trying to bring the same level of seriousness to this region that the Pacific Northwest tends to get by default. He passed away in 2024, and even though he may not be a household name in the world of Bigfoot, his work mattered. His efforts mattered. Without people like Bill, a lot of what we know about this region's encounters would have just faded into the fog. Another name is Dr. Warren Cook. Cook was a professor at Castleton College in Vermont, and what made him different, what made him valuable, was that he didn't dismiss the subject out of hand. He didn't treat it like a joke. He brought an academic lens to something that usually gets laughed out of the room. He investigated reports seriously. He talked to witnesses like they were people, not punchlines. And he saw patterns here, specifically in this part of Vermont, that others were ignoring. Cook worked closely with researchers like Paul Bartholomew and Bill Brand, and together they helped preserve some of the most compelling accounts to come out of the Northeast. And it's fitting that not far from where Cook worked, something strange happened. Something that still isn't answered. In 1995, a man and his cousin set off on a mountain biking trip through the Calvin Coolidge State Forest just outside of Plymouth. Their destination was an old lean-to called the Tinker Brook Shelter, perched on the edge of a steep ravine near the backside of Killington Peak. It's not a place you get to easily. You've gotta drive up a winding switchback road, park on a bend barely visible from the highway, and hike the rest of the way in. It's the kind of spot you pick if you want to be completely alone. They got up there, set up camp, and turned in for the night. Around midnight, one of them woke up to what felt like something pushing against the shelter. A bump, a shove, and another. Not loud, but deliberate. At first they thought maybe it was a bear or a moose. So one of them stepped outside with a flashlight and circled the back of the shelter. Nothing. No eye shine, no movement. Just dark trees and the sound of the forest holding its breath. But the bumps came again and again for hours. Whatever it was never tried to break in, never made itself fully seen. It just made its presence known. Steady, consistent pressure, as if to say, you're not alone out here. They didn't sleep much that night, and when morning came, there was no damage to the shelter, no tracks in the dirt, no broken branches. Just an overwhelming feeling that they'd stepped somewhere they weren't supposed to be. They packed up and left. That kind of low-level intimidation, where nothing happens but everything feels wrong. That's something I've heard before, in different parts of the country. Remote campsites, deep woods. Some researchers believe it happens when you've gone too far into a creature's territory. Not enough to provoke violence, just enough to remind you that you've crossed a line. And when I think about people like Warren Cook, it's reports like this that make his legacy feel that much more important. He helped legitimize these kinds of stories. He gave them context, a framework. He understood that you don't always need to see a monster to know you've encountered something unnatural. These stories don't come with proof. They don't offer closure, but they stick with you for decades. Because it's one thing to believe in something. It's another to feel it in the dark, just on the other side of the shelter wall. So Steve, where are we now?
So we're on the backside of Bird Mountain. And this is where the ATV rider had his roadside encounter.
The baby's pretty good.
Up the road, and one ran in front of him, and he just kept on going. And then he got up, he said he got up about a little bit, and then looked back, but he didn't see anything.
What did he describe?
Oh, 7 foot, 8 foot, hairy bipedal. I think he said it was black and going with, brown or reddish brown or black. Said definitely he saw it making stride. He said, from what I can recall, he said it had a very large stride, like it was only like a couple of steps for it to get over the road. And as you can see, the road isn't very wide either, so I can probably make it over 4 or 5 steps myself.
How did that report come to you?
Actually, it came at one of the earlier Whitehall Sasquatch festivals. Yeah, we did like, a number of years ago, we did like a little town hall. And somebody had come forward and said, I live behind Bird Mountain, and I've got my TV up just this past, I think even just the past August of this. I want to say this was around 2017, could be earlier too, because there's been so many of them that, not writing it down, but you remember things. And the same year, I believe it was 2017, because in the same year we had another roadside crossing here before, just outside of Fairhaven in New York, near Abear Road, where a family of 4 had seen one cross that was actually walking alongside the road as they came up with tool men. And then they actually kind of stopped, not said anything, and then all of a sudden they started talking about it, because they were all trying to digest what they had seen. But again, this guy, since he's up there all the time, that was the first time he had ever seen anything like that.
I know you and the way you put this stuff together. Can you, I know we already did this in the movie, but can you talk about, how you think this is all connected?
Yeah. So if you follow, this area with Whitehall area, and you just see this whole string of sightings. It's not coincidence. It's been going on since the 40s and 30s even. Some of the stories I've heard people talk about their grandparents having said their aunts and uncles having sighted. In fact, the last Whitehall Festival I talked to a guy who was
as much intel as you can.
in his 90s.
Accounting are very secret.
He had told me
Who
that,
knows what they've hidden?
boy,
I will reward you for whatever you find.
he had a sighting. And, you know, I'm looking at them, they're not looking for any notoriety or anything. So I think, you know, they're pretty legit. But if you just follow the MO, and again, the types of forest, why does one season seem to favor this area versus the Adirondacks, which seem to favor another season? So I think what happens is in the summer,
We're getting a W, boys.
it's a little more dense here than it is. I've always wondered why do they go to the Adirondacks, and I think I just finally triggered it on. You notice the forest is much more compacted here. There's less airflow. You go up in the Adirondacks, especially in the summertime, there's more airflow. So it's probably a little cooler for them, less humid for them in the Adirondacks. So in August, we see them move, or July, we see them activity pick up in the Adirondacks. They go on to about November when it starts to get a bit nippy, and then the activity picks up over on this side where the forest is more condensed. There's a lot more pine in these forests than over there. You know, the eastern side of the Adirondacks, there's a lot of birch maple loam, so they all drop their leaves. Whereas here you have, you know, not so much in this part, but you can still see some pine trees here and there. And as far as you go further up, you go further out, more pine there is. So they may come down and forage for food and water, and they go back up in the winter times. But they're, you know, they have that cover with the pine.
Have you seen that play out in terms of like, is there a preponderance of sightings here at certain times of the year as opposed to like the Adirondacks? That's the other thing is like,
yeah, we can get a lot more in the springtime on this side, and then the late summer and fall you get it over in the Adirondacks. But I don't think it's necessarily exclusive either. I think there's some that stay behind, there's some that don't. In either context. It depends again if you follow primates and how they live and how their families work. You know, you may have the lone males that they're going out to find their own way. And matter of fact, there's a good biological reason for doing that, is that so it cuts down on injuries. So that's why, you know, like a chimpanzee or why is it, you know, they all, like gorillas, not gorillas, why do they all live in this contained area, you know, in Rwanda, but don't have a big inbreeding problem? It's because the lone males just go off on their own. They find, just as part of their natural instinct, find something they're not related to. So I think that's perhaps what goes on with a Bigfoot or Sasquatch being a primate, that, and why sometimes you get these weird type of sightings, like, why do you have one over here? But again, you can see the report, it was a big, really big one, girly one, it just took off when it got seen. What I always look for is that territorial type behavior. I haven't seen that over here yet, but we have seen it over there.
so you mean like aggressive kind of territorial?
Yeah, like throwing rocks, screaming, escorts. Yeah, the Weitzel case back in 2000, which brought me to my research area. Him and his wife went off trail. They were about a quarter mile off trail when something began to scream at them. And now John had been up there all his life. He lived up there. He dealt with bear and other things up there. He goes, whatever it was, he goes, shook my chest. So they decided to leave, and as they're leaving, John could see a dark, tall figure just moving tree to tree to tree, kind of keeping an eye on them, screaming even some more until the point they got out.
Did he describe the scream like high pitch?
No, it was like just a roar. And he said it just got him in the chest. He says, I've been up here with bear. You know, bear. And, you know, a lot of people think, you know, people go in the woods and they hear growling. And I've heard this used. Well, it's probably a bear growling outside that. Bears don't growl. They don't open doors. They growl. That's why they grunt and they snap their lips. That's how they show their aggression and tension.
It's the only thing I will say, and I've realized since we got here, Mike, you might be able to speak this too, is like, I'm from Ohio. It's wild to drive like 5-6 hours and be in a place where there's signs, like warning signs for moose. And then when you look at the fact that there's also like a very substantial bear population in a state the size of Vermont, like I don't think people realize how many black bears there are in the country in general.
Well, even in New York, there's 5 figures of bear in New York. And there's supposed to be bear in my research area. You get to see one. Up here, you get to see one.
And there's like 70, they're saying there's 7,200, 7,500 bear.
Yeah, here's a real funny thing, is that you have Rensselaer County, which is the county out from Columbia County, city of Troy, which is a city of 27,000 people. And right on the outskirts of Troy, there's a moose caught in a camera at the gas station. So it's really, wildlife can be anywhere. So people say, oh, there's a Bigfoot, Bigfoot can't necessarily be there. Unless it's a big arterial artery that's surrounded by arterial thoroughfares.
Yeah, the presence of like moose and bear up there.
Yeah, it's there. I mean, you've got plenty of paths. You know, looking through here, looking at the game trails that are coming through here, right what I'm looking at now. You know, I was running the bird app to kind of see what's coming up here bird-wise, but we're talking, so it's kind of, we're getting more of that.
Checking for birds and bird now.
Yeah. But I mean, it's such a crazy thing when you do think about something the size of a moose and how much they see up and how much they're migrating. I mean, you've been talking to some folks in New York State, their sightings over on my side of the state. So, you know, the big heavy concentration over here, but it's really weird just to see what those pockets are. I mean, you even have like the wolf sightings and some of the cat sightings more over here than you have, quote unquote, 15 minutes down the road, a little farther than that, you know, in New York State. You're right sitting on the border right now.
And then you see these clumps of sightings. Like, I'll give you a great example. 1976, you have this big, from 1974 to 1976, you have these whole rash of sightings in Whitehall. And it gets quiet for a few years, but there's some sporadic ones here and there, but not to the concentration. And the 80s, where you get this big concentration. I mean, you didn't see my uncle talking with Heather, but I met an old school friend. He was on him, like, oh, you're into the Bigfoot thing, yeah. Well, my father lives down in Kinderhook. He saw one in his driveway. Was it in the 80s? Yeah. So you have all these congruences. But another, in 2006, there was another flat. You know, we had a sighting where we had 5 people see the same Bigfoot within 30 minutes, 2 separate encounters in the same 100-foot area of space. And then we had another sighting down the road, maybe a quarter of a mile, half mile. That person didn't even know what happened on the hill a week before. And so you get these things that just... Another interesting thing, too, is that in 76, when you had that flap, the apple orchard was actually on the Game Bear side road. Right now, they're all dead. They've all been cut down. There's some development going in on that. So, and it's right on the Vermont border. There was an apple orchard to the, I would say, north side of Route 4. In 2006, there's an apple orchard on the south side of Route 4, and that's where all the 2006 flap was going. It was over that way. So is there a, and then you look at the other, you look at the Vermont Trail Camp apple tree involved. You look at the New York Navy Village, aka the Pridgeon film. Behind him was an old apple orchard.
The safe zone is elapsed. Airdrop has been delivered.
Airdrop's coming.
Airdrop has been delivered. Down to the last 5 feet. The safe zone is collapsing.
So yeah, we have the Grabowskis, which is down there, and then Professor Warren Cook's daughter had a sighting, that was approximately there. Actually, this is on the road as the road bends around. So you have all these sightings, one after the other after the other. What it says to me is that we have a population of something living somewhere in here. How many of them there are? I'm not an ecologist to say, but I did, my background is investigation, so I can put A, B, and C together and focus on operandi and behavioral aspects.
Yeah.
So, hey, investigatory-wise, I have a line of evidence or something here, but scientifically, you have obviously a stronger mantle than that. You need to have something physical. But the evidence, as far as and I hate when people call a lot of it is anecdotal. Me telling you these stories is anecdotal. But when you have a witness standing there, that's direct testimony. Like when I'm anecdotal about everything except my own true sightings. We always fall into that trap of what the skeptics are harping on. Years ago, there's not enough food in the forest to support a creature this big. And after a while, we got, well, that's kind of laughable because a black bear, or a moose, but a black bear, for example, is even more of an outstanding example because they have to put on pounds to hibernate. So they eat, within a 3-month period, they have to eat 15,000 calories a day for 3 months before they can hibernate. If they can do that in the forest, why can't a Sasquatch eat 4,000 or 3,000 calories a day?
Yo, full team.
But you think about it, there are more skunks near human beings. There's more raccoons near
Continue investigating for as much intel as you can.
than they are out
The
in the
Tom
forest.
team are very secretive.
You go
Who
out
knows what they've
into the
hidden?
forest
I will reward you for whatever you find.
you never see a skunk, you never see a squirrel, you never see a raccoon. You see a porcupine once in a while, or even a possum. But even possums generally tend to go because they scatter. What you see in a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot is that innate ability to realize I want to live here, but when it's time to eat, I need to come in closer, which is another reason why you might see them looking at campsites, looking at people. We generalize to anthropomorph things and say, well, they must be curious about it. They must be curious about it. Maybe they're just looking for their next meal.
Right? I mean, that's a big thing. I mean, when you say density population for a thing, I mean, you look at Jersey with their bear population. I mean, I have a friend that had an ant that was attacked going between the 2 houses in a residential neighborhood.
North Jersey.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't know. Like, you gotta get out, you gotta see what's in the area, collect as much data on what's there. Again, with security cameras, trail cameras, we're picking up more stuff. I mean, I had one security camera at my house just sitting on a field, see what's coming. And it's interesting to watch deer when they're not paying attention for everything that's in plane or something on the side. So the ability there to test things down the line. But again, it's collecting that data.
There's a tendency when people talk about Bigfoot to imagine it tethered to just a handful of places. The Pacific Northwest, the Rockies, maybe the swamps of the South. But what gets overlooked again and again is the dense patchwork of wilderness here in the Northeast. Parts of Vermont still feel untouched. The forests are deep, the terrain is rugged, and there's just enough mystery to the landscape that you start to understand why people might say something still walks these woods. When we talk about whether there's suitable habitat for a creature like Sasquatch, this part of the country checks a lot of boxes. Vast stretches of unbroken forest, water sources, a decent food supply, and maybe most importantly, not a lot of people, especially not after dark. But the thing is, if you follow these ridge lines and valleys just a little ways west, you end up in one of the most storied, mysterious regions on the East Coast, the Adirondack Mountains. We came here back in 2020 during the filming of On the Trail of Bigfoot Journey, camped at the base of Buck Mountain near Lake George. I remember thinking as we hiked the trail that afternoon, how it felt like we'd stepped into a completely moss-covered boulders, tight clusters of pine. Everything smelled wet and ancient. That night, nothing happened. No knocks, no eye shine. Just the stillness of the woods and the occasional wind. But the history of that mountain, of that area, is anything but quiet. Back in July of 2000, a man and his wife were hiking that very same trail, Buck Mountain, when they left the path to take photos near the creek. They thought they were alone. Only one other car was in the trailhead. But then they heard it, a deep guttural sound, something between a roar and a scream. It was loud, so loud it didn't seem possible that it came from a human. The man was a seasoned outdoorsman. He'd faced down bear before. He knew what bobcats sounded like, coyotes. This wasn't that. Whatever it was, it moved toward him, snapping branches, circling, screaming 7 times until at one point it was only 25 feet away. They couldn't see it through the trees, but they could feel it watching them, following them. They ran terrified, and whatever it was kept pace alongside them in the brush, tracking them all the way back to the trailhead. 15 years later, and not far from there, just off the eastern shoreline of Lake George, another couple had a sighting that's hard to explain. They were boating on a sunny June afternoon, idling slowly through a narrow channel, when they spotted movement along the shoreline. Something large, black, upright. It raised one arm, turned, and vanished behind the trees. The woman said it was swaying side to side, not like a bear, but something different, human. And as they grilled dinner on a nearby island a short time later, both of them felt a strange pressure, a weird sense that they were being crushed. It was enough to cut the meal short and send them packing. That shoreline is protected state land, designated forever wild. You could hike for miles in either direction and never see another person. And what's more, it's just a few miles south of Whitehall, New York, home to some of the most well-documented Bigfoot encounters east of the Mississippi. There's a pattern. These aren't fleeting shadows darting across roads or shaking blobs in the woods. These are close encounters, vocalizations, a sense of presence, sightings near water, sightings in the thick of the forest, sightings near Buck Mountain, where we spent a quiet night in 2020, aware of just how loud things can get when the forest decides to speak.
You know, there was a fast run through that night, and it was a quiet night, you know. That's still a location I'm still trying to figure out. That we had a rock incident. Like, I literally went through, checked all the trees, make sure we didn't pine, oak, you know, acorns, whatever. But whatever was just up the side of the car, I'm skipping across. soft.
But they weren't heavy.
They weren't, no, just small.
See,
Buck Mound too, just real quick for people watching who don't know. Explain where Buck Mound is, especially in relation to Whitehall.
it's about 7 or 8 miles south west of Whitehall. It's probably the nearest, closest forested corridor near Whitehall, and it traditionally had a lot of sightings. I mean, think about it, for an area that's got about as much thoroughfare as we here.
Добро пожаловать.
It's had dozens of sightings over the last 20 years. Now, you may not think that's much, but it's not a very highly populated population. There's people just going in, and all of a sudden, there it is.
Yeah, I hate to do it again, but can you walk us through those pictures?
Well, let me give you a history of that area down the stern, and it has had its periods of nothing happens. So maybe it's a cyclical thing where they come and they go and they come back after a few years, depending on what.
Have you noticed what the period is? Is it like 2 to 3 years?
COVID messed that up. COVID, no, everyone was there. Everyone was there. So let me.
That's why we couldn't find a parking spot.
That never happened. I have seen one park ranger up there at that point in 19 years. Whitehall has a sighting in 2000. I'm up there in 2000. We continue on and I keep researching that area. Finally in 2010, there was a very strange event. We kept hearing things kind of moving around us. After which we decided, let me leave a recorder in the camp. When we leave, we walk down the hill, there's only 3 of us. And a little while later, you hear on the camp, now my years was October, September, October, so there's you hear some
The safe zone is collapsing.
leaflet, and you hear right up against the microphone. And then you just hear it. Keep on going. Interesting. In 2011, everybody was hearing that movement. I bring the teams in, and we're going to take a break before we go out for our evening run. So everybody's getting something to eat. We're quarterly and having a good time. And I'm like, my headlamp's kind of low. I'm going to go get some batteries. And I open up my car door, get my batteries, light up a cigarette, fill out my flashlight, and look down to looking north is downhill, which is where all the activity was. Nothing, look up, and there is one standing next to the telephone pole on the dirt road, watching, well, actually looking at me now. But I'm sure he was spying on our campsite. They wonder, we're cooking food, something smells good, so who knows, man, like, anyway, after shaking a light, it took off. A year later, I had a bunch of researchers up there, and I undid my tent after night doing stuff, and from there I see a 5.5 bow and a just. So you look at that. Then in 2013, it got quiet again. And then it started to pick up in 2017. Michael and I were up there in Moxford, then COVID hit. So we weren't up there for 3 years. In 2022, we were up there. It was kind of quiet, a little here and there, but nothing major. And then in 2023, which was the pinnacle, because Alex was with us, and I do something I've done for the last 20 years. Mercurius line, I just used to whoop a couple times and knock, and eventually the last few years I started talking. Going, hey guys, I'm here. That's okay. Trying to, because that's how Jane Goodall did it, that's how Diane Fossey did it. Primates can understand, recognize voices, they can recognize dogs can. So meanwhile, while I'm doing that, I'm like, so while I'm doing that, you hear Alex outside. What was that? Oh, goodness. And then a minute and a half later, we had a single clear whoop call coming up there. And I said, what the hell? Alex said it was probably the best one he's ever. And
Can you describe it?
Yep. I truly think they know me by now. I mean, there's one that habituating, oh, there's that guy who never causes any trouble. And I mean, weird stuff. I mean, we would walk down the road during this time period, back in the 2011, 2012. I had my son up there, and I think it was 2017, 2018. And as we're walking down the, me and another guy walked down. I don't know if you were there that night, Mike, but we walked down the road, and as we're walking down the dirt road, there's something moving along the woods on one side of us and the other side. So we stop, and it stops. We start going back the other way. It's following us back up that way. What does that? So then I turn around, I said, my son and his friend, both are Fish and Wildlife management now. Guess what my son does now? He's a New York State Forest Ranger. And they walk down there.
He's part of the cover-up.
Yeah, part of the cover-up. Walks down the road, and they come back, and his son's following us on both sides of the road. We didn't tell him what was going on. Just come down there. Son's following us on both sides of the road. Nothing does that. Yeah, no kidding. So that's going to be it. It's not aggressive. It's very passive. I think because I've gotten to that, we're not really in their territory anyway. Their territory is further in. I would expect them to be a little hostile if we start delving in, especially if something sensitive is going on, like mating or taking care of their young or anything like that. But it's just amazing the number of experiences. I mean, I had another team member see the shadow. We had a couple other members see one in the daytime there. Very briefly, we were spying on a mountain. Well, often I caught it too. You just see they saw it better than I did, but I just saw this mountain go. Now, the only other thing that would have been that color is either a bear or a Bigfoot. That tall off a tree, because literally it was like I could see the tree and I could just see this real quick movement once, and they're like, oh, what's that other thing?
Have you talked to any rangers up in that part of the region that have said they actually encountered?
They're pretty tight-lipped about that. You see, you gotta understand that NCON is run by scientists. Recently, there's a good one. Recently, I FOIL requested NCON for any New York State NCON report, or any kind of New York State forest report, for any Bigfoot reported sighting at all, and any details of the report. I got a letter back from them 6 days later as per the FOIL request, saying they could find no reports of anybody reporting a Bigfoot to NCON in 2017 until February 1, 2025. So if they're being reported, they're not being documented because either one, we don't want a bunch of crazy people in the woods with guns, right? Or two, well, I believe you, man, but